Middle-earth, home to many diverse races, from wizards to hobbits, goblins to dwarves, orcs to elves. Many stories have been created and developed in the world of Tolkien. To delve into the world, you can start here with DagoraC TV.
The round valley of smoothness, named Gondolin, lying within the encircling mountains, was originally a lake. In the valley's centre stood a hill that was once an island named Amon Gwynedd. Here it was where Turgon decided to found his hidden city. It was originally a memorial to the ancient Tirion, which was a Noldorin city that lay beyond the Great Sea. The very first building of Gondolin took 52 years to complete. After this time, the people of Turgon, along with a great number of Noldor and Sindar, travelled from Nervrast, which is where they dwelt, and secretly entered the Round Valley. Turgon had the privilege of naming the city and titled it Gondolin, Quenya for the rock and the music of water, because of the fountains of Amon Gwynedd. But in Sindarin, this was rendered Gondolin, the hidden rock. After their arrival in the new city, the Gondolin continued to partake in the labour in its building, until it was said to rival the greatest cities of old. Its walls stood tall and white above the plain. The city's most notorious feature was the Great Tower of the King, where, among the fountains, Turgon himself made Glingel and Belthil, the trees of gold and silver, which were made in memory of the two trees in Valinor. There followed 2 centuries of complete and happy peace. Morgoth was besieged in the far north of the world, away from the city, and the people of Gondolin lived undisturbed by the events that took place in the far corners of Middle-earth. At last, though an era of trouble had appeared, King Turgon's sister Aredal, who was deeply determined to leave the city, which was against Turgon's wishes, and journeyed into Middle-earth. Soon after her departure, her guards returned. They had reported that they had lost sight of her in the dark and sorcerous region to the south of the city, which became known as Nan Dungareth. There was a period of over 20 years, and then suddenly Aredal returned. There was a dark elf who had accompanied her. She claimed to be Maeglin, her son by Eol, and the dark elf, Nan Elmoth. This Maeglin accepted Turgon as lord, but his father Eol had followed his wife and son to Gondolin, and had been captured at the entranceway of the city. He was brought before Turgon. Eol refused to submit to Turgon's authority, and instead chose death for himself and his unwilling son. He threw a poisoned dart to slay Maeglin, but instead struck Aredal, which fell ill with the poison and died. The body of Eol was broken on the character for this. Maeglin, though, had no part in these elves, and Turgon accepted him, and he grew to be among the great in Gondolin, wise in counsel, cunning in smithcraft, and mighty in battle. For more than 100 years after the deaths of Aredal and Eol, Gondolin again had peace. The time was coming though, when Morgoth would break the siege of Angband, and the unstoppable doom of the elves would fall upon them. One winter's night, the fires of Angband destroyed the League of the Noldor, the DagoraC. In the disaster, the people of Gondolin played no immediate part. They were drawn into the events of those years, though when the young brothers of the race of men, Húrin and Hór, were cut from their army and became lost amid the feet of the Crissaegrim, Thorondor brought them to Turgon. At the bidding of Ulmo, Turgon accepted them, and they remained in Gondolin for almost a year, when they returned to their homes. In this kindly act were the first seeds of Gondolin's destruction, more than 50 years later. Turgon now devised a new policy for their salvation of the elves. He began secretly to send his people out westward across the Great Sea, to seek the land of the Valar, and ask their pardon and aid. None of his mariners succeeded, but this was a wise course, though Turgon never knew it. He was lost long before his grandson Eärendil, aided by his Silmaril, finally succeeded in this task. As time passed since the destruction of DagoraC, the elves of Beleriand began to arm for counterstroke, and Turgon secretly began his own preparations. "14 years after the breaking of the siege of Angband, and some 350 since the completion of Gondolin, Turgon rode for the first time to war. Unknown and unbidden by his king, he rode to their aid with an army of 10,000. This was to be the great battle that was to become known as Nirnaeth Anodiad. Morgoth poured much of his strength and resources into discovering the location of the hidden city, and his spies invested lands about the encircling mountains and wherever he could penetrate. After Nargothrond fell, Gondolin was the last great stronghold of the Noldor. The unbidden coming of Maeglin participated in the destruction of the great city. The first great blow to the security of Gondolin came by accident. Húrin, who was once held captive by Morgoth, was released to wander in the world, unconsciously, furthering the Dark Lord's cause. He came to the edge of the mountains, hoping that an eagle would bear him to Gondolin. But Turgon, afraid for the lives of those in his city, and rightfully fearing what Morgoth might have searched to done with Húrin, withheld rescue for too long. Húrin, seeking nothing, cried out in a loud voice, "Turgon, Turgon, remember the fen of Skerech. O Turgon, will you not hear in the hidden halls?" Morgoth now knew the general area in which Gondolin lay, for his spies were watching this. Húrin turned away, broken and bitter. Ulmo, the patron god of the city, watched with sad eyes, foreseeing the doom of Gondolin. He called forth Tuor, son of Huor, to the city, where he gave him a message for Turgon. Tuor delivered the message faithfully, by the aid of Ulmo and an elf named Voronway, who guided him to the city. Ulmo's advice was that Turgon must abandon the city and seek the sea. Thor, Hithero the Valar, and barred Turgon's messengers from reaching the Undying Lands. Ulmo foresaw that a direct descendant of the Lords of the Noldor might be able to pass to the lands of the West. Turgon, because of his pride and love for the city, decided to ignore this warning. Tuor, however, was welcomed in the city by all save Maeglin. Unwittingly, Turgon, who had always been so careful about strangers, further advised the events that would lead to the fall of Gondolin by allowing Tuor to stay. For Tuor and Idril, the king's daughter, fell in love. It was an extremely rare thing for a man to wed an elf woman, but Turgon, who loved Tuor as a son, permitted it when he found that his daughter was full willing. Maeglin hated Tuor for this, and plotted his revenge on Idril, and as the years passed, on their son, the beautiful Eärendil. While searching for ore and stray against the commands of Turgon, too far from the city, Maeglin was captured by orcs. At his begging and bribing, they took him for Morgoth himself, who extracted the information about Gondolin at a price: the death of Tuor and Eärendil, the hand of Idril, and the lordship of Gondolin after its capture. Maeglin returned to Gondolin and kept his capture by Morgoth a secret. Idril, however, who had noticed and rejected his advances, saw and feared the change that had come over him. Therefore she discussed, with her husband, the idea of making an escape tunnel. Tuor, confused but willing, complied. In secret, a tunnel that cut through the rock of the hill and under the Tumlanden was constructed. At last, Morgoth finalized his plan, and he loosened his massive grip upon the city. Again, Tuor and the others urged Turgon to flee the brunt of the assault, but, convinced of the invincibility of his city, and with Maeglin whispering in his ear, Turgon decided to stay and fight. There was a great siege, during which Maeglin sought from the inside to take Idril and throw Eärendil from the walls. But Tuor arrived in time to save them both, and after a brief struggle, hurled Maeglin down into the flames. But the city could not be saved, and thousands were killed. One by one, the great lords of Gondolin fell, and Turgon, disillusioned and broken-hearted, ordered all to follow Tuor out from the tunnel, and when he saw that the destruction was inevitable. Only his guards stayed around him, and all who remained were killed as the White Tower collapsed. Gathering as many of the people as they could find, Tuor and Idril escaped down the tunnel. It was a hard road through the mountains. Glorfindel was killed by a Balrog that lay in ambush. But at last, the Gondolin came to Namtathran, and after resting there for some time, they came down to the refuge in the mountains of Sirion, and mourned the loss of the White City.